In the northern marches of the Old Kingdom, where the land rose slowly into stone and mist, there stood a monastery whose bell tower pierced the low sky like a finger raised in quiet warning. The chronicles name the place only once, and then in passing, as if the ink itself wished to move on. Yet for nearly 30 years the bell rang there every night, though no hand was seen to pull the rope. The girl who heard it most clearly was named Elswith. She lived at the edge of the monastery's shadow, in a house that smelled of damp wool, ash, and dried herbs. Its walls were thin, its beams darkened by time and smoke, and its windows never quite closed. The wind found its way in always. So did the bell. Elswith was not remarkable to the eye. She was of average height, her hair the color of old flax, her hands roughened by work too early learned. Those who passed her on the road would not have turned their heads. But at night, when the bell spoke, she would sit upright in her bed as if summoned by name, her breath caught halfway between fear and obedience. For the bell did not merely ring, called. At the 9th hour, when the monastery brothers had long since retreated into silence and prayer, a single note would rise into the dark, heavy and deliberate. Then another, and then, faintly, woven between the echoes, a voice that only Elswith seemed to hear. It spoke with the sound of her sister. Elfrun had died 7 winters before, during the great fever that swept the valley. She had been older by 3 years, steadier of hand, quicker to laugh. When she burned, Elswith had pressed cool cloths to her brow until the water warmed like blood. When Elfrun finally stilled, the room smelled of iron and sour sweat, and the silence afterward was so complete it felt like a theft. The monks said the soul, once gone, did not linger. The priests said the dead spoke only through scripture and memory. Elswith had believed them until the bell began. Come, the voice would say. Sometimes it was only that single word, frayed at the edges, as if it had traveled far. Other nights it spoke her name, slowly, with the patience of someone accustomed to waiting. She never answered aloud. She did not need to. Her body already knew what was asked. Each night she rose, wrapped herself in a cloak that smelled of smoke and old rain, and stepped onto the narrow path that led uphill. The grass along the way was always wet, even in drought, and the stones chilled her feet through leather soles. Above her, the bell tower loomed, its narrow windows unlit, its mouth open to the sky. The brothers did not stop her. Some pretended not to see. Others watched with eyes carefully emptied of judgment. The monastery was a place built on obedience. Strange acts, if repeated long enough, became part of the order of things. Inside the tower, the air was thick with dust and bird droppings. The rope hung still. The bell itself, greened with age, bore an inscription in a Latin hand none of the living could fully read. When the wind moved through the stones, it carried a smell of cold metal and old prayers. Elswith would stand beneath it, heart beating softly, and listen. She never saw her sister. There were no visions, no shining forms. Only the voice, close now, speaking not of heaven or hell, but of small things. A forgotten song, the way their mother's hands shook when she baked, the sound the river made under ice. Once it asked if Elswith remembered the day they climbed the yew tree and would not come down until dusk. Memory, she learned, could wound more cleanly than any blade. The monks argued among themselves in whispers. Some said it was temptation, a trial sent by God to measure her faith. Others murmured of purgatory, of souls not yet loosed. One, older than the rest, said nothing at all, but watched the tower with eyes that had seen too much time pass. Time itself seemed altered by the bell. Days grew thin, nights long. Elswith moved through her work as if through water, hearing echoes where there were none. Yet she did not flee. Fear lived in her, yes, but so did duty. An older, quieter bond that death had not cut. Death, she was learning, did not end a life. It rearranged it. When winter came again, the bell rang through snow. The sound was duller, wrapped in white, but the voice remained. Elswith's breath smoked in the dark as she climbed, and she wondered, not for the first time, whether freedom was the right to refuse the dead, or the courage to listen. Faith had taught her that God spoke through silence. The bell taught her otherwise. And so she went, night after night, a living woman answering a call meant for no one, walking willingly into a space where time bent and the past still breathed. The valley slept, the monks prayed, the bell waited, and above it all, unseen, history paused just long enough to watch her climb. As the weeks folded into one another, the people of the valley began to measure time not by saints' days or harvest signs, but by the sound of the bell. It had become a second moon, unseen yet governing the night. Dogs whimpered when it rang. Infants stirred in their sleep. Even those who swore they heard nothing still paused, as if listening for something they would never admit existed. Elswith felt the change most in her body. Her sleep thinned. Her dreams grew heavy and deliberate, as though shaped by another will. She dreamed of corridors without doors, of water standing perfectly still, of her sister's shadow stretching longer than her body. When she woke, her chest ached. Not sharply, but with a slow, patient pressure, like hands resting there. During the day, she worked in the herb garden near the monastery walls. The earth was cold and smelled of rot and life entwined. When she knelt, her knees sank into mud dark as ink. She crushed leaves between her fingers, sage, wormwood, yarrow, and the bitter oils clung to her skin. The brothers passed her in silence, their robes whispering like restrained thoughts. One of them, Brother Aldrich, lingered once. He was not young, but age had not softened him. His face was narrow, his beard streaked with white, his eyes steady in a way that suggested he had long ago chosen what to believe and what to refuse. He watched Elswith's separate routes with careful hands. "You go every night," he said at last. She did not look up. "Yes. Do you know why?" She considered the question as one considers a stone found in the road, briefly, without hope of moving it. "Because I am called." Aldrich's mouth tightened, not in anger, but in something like sorrow. "Many are called by voices," he said. "Not all should answer." Elswith brushed soil from her root. It left a smear across her palm like a bruise. "If a voice knows your childhood," she said softly, "knows the weight of your name when it was first spoken, what then?" The monk had no reply. He turned away, his steps slower than before. That night the voice changed. It did not begin with calling. It began with weeping. The sound rose between the bell's notes, thin and restrained, as if held back for years. Elswith's throat tightened before she reached the tower. Inside, the darkness felt closer, the air more crowded. She smelled damp stone, old feathers, something faintly sweet and wrong. "Why do you cry?" she asked, before fear could stop her. There was a pause. Then, "Because I am tired." The words were simple. That was what frightened her. The voice spoke then of waiting, of standing in a place without wind or warmth, where time did not pass but pressed inward. It spoke of being remembered imperfectly, like a face seen through water. It did not accuse. It did not plead. It only told. Elswith listened, her hands clenched in her cloak. Compassion moved through her slowly, like dawn light. She thought of death not as an ending, but as a narrowing, a long corridor where one must walk without knowing if there is a door. "Can you be freed?" she asked. The bell rang once, heavy enough to shake dust from the beams. "I do not know," the voice said. "Faith was meant to carry us, but faith depends on the living." The thought settled in her like ash. Freedom, she realized, was not a simple thing. The monks spoke of it as obedience to God's will. The Lord spoke of it as order imposed. But here, in the dark beneath the bell, freedom sounded like release from being remembered only as a loss. From that night onward, the bell's toll grew heavier, its sound lingering longer in the air. Elswith felt it in her bones. Her steps slowed, her face thinned, yet she did not stop. Some in the valley whispered that she was cursed. Others said she was blessed. Both words, she found, were ways of placing distance between oneself and another's suffering. Winter deepened. Snow packed against the tower stones. The bell rang through it all, patient and unyielding. And Elswith continued to climb, carrying with her the quiet, unbearable truth that love does not end at death. it only loses its language. Still she listened. For time, like the bell, does not rest. By the third winter after the bell had begun its nightly speech, Elswith understood that her life no longer belonged entirely to the living. Her body moved among others. She gathered herbs, mended cloth, carried water, but some essential portion of her had settled elsewhere, in that narrow place between stone and sound where the bell waited. People spoke to her, and she answered when required, yet their words arrived as if from across a field. She had become, without ceremony, a witness rather than a participant. The valley noticed. Children stopped asking her questions. Women lowered their voices when she passed. Men watched with the guarded curiosity reserved for things that might break if touched. Isolation did not come as exile. It came as courtesy. No one wished to disturb what they did not understand. Elswith did not resent this. Solitude, she had learned, could be gentler than pity. The bell continued to call, but the voice now spoke less of memory and more of absence. It described a place without horizon, where thought echoed endlessly, returning altered each time. It spoke of prayer dissolving before it could rise, of names losing their weight. Elfrun, if it was truly she, did not describe torment. She described stagnation, a stillness so complete it felt like suffocation. "There is no night here," the voice said once. "Only waiting." Elswith pressed her forehead to the cold stone of the tower wall. It smelled of lichen and old rain. "Then why call me?" she asked. "Because you remember," the voice replied, "and because you are not yet afraid enough to turn away." The answer followed her down the hill, settled beside her as she lay awake, and remained with her through the gray hours of morning. Fear, she understood, was not a sudden thing. It grew slowly, fed by repetition. And yet love grew in the same manner, patient and unremarkable until it was too late to deny. One evening, Brother Aldrich came to her door. He did not knock. He stood outside until she noticed the shape of him through the warped glass. When she opened the door, cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of snow and pine smoke. Aldrich removed his hood, revealing hair thinned by years and a face marked by careful restraint. "You are weakening," he said. She did not dispute it. "There are rules," he continued. "The dead must not bind the living. That is not mercy. That is theft." Elswith studied his hands. They trembled faintly. "And if the living are all that binds the dead to meaning?" she asked. Aldrich closed his eyes. When he opened them, something in him had shifted. Not belief, but certainty. "Then God has made a cruel world. Or a fragile one," Elswith said. He left without blessing her. That night, the bell rang earlier than usual. The sound cut through twilight, sharp and insistent. Elswith climbed faster than before, her breath burning her throat. Inside the tower, the air felt wrong. Too close, too still. The bell swayed slightly, though there was no wind. The voice spoke with urgency. "It is narrowing," it said. "The place where I remain. I am being folded away." Elswith felt a cold spread through her chest. "What does that mean?" "I am forgetting," the voice answered. "Not you, but myself." Silence followed, heavier than any sound. Elswith thought then of death not as an enemy, but as erosion, the slow wearing away of what once had edges. Time did not kill. It smoothed. It took the sharpness of pain but also the clarity of being. "What would you have me do?" she asked. The bell rang once, long and low. "Remember me aloud," the voice said. "Carry me where I cannot go." Elswith descended the tower at dawn with a strange calm. The world seemed unchanged. The frost on the grass, the smoke lifting from chimneys, but she felt as though a boundary had been crossed. To remember aloud was no small thing. It meant defiance. It meant choosing memory over order. That day, she spoke her sister's name in the open air. The sound felt forbidden, like stepping onto thin ice. No lightning fell. No monk corrected her. The name drifted away on the wind, unremarkable, human. She spoke it again the next day, and the next. With each utterance, something shifted within her. Not relief, but weight. Memory, once shared, demanded care. She began to tell small stories. How Elfrun laughed without covering her mouth. How she feared deep water. How she loved the smell of apples stored for winter. People listened at first with discomfort, then with curiosity, then with something like reverence. The bell still rang at night, but the voice grew fainter. Elswith did not know whether this meant release or erasure. She only knew that time, like faith, asked for endurance rather than understanding. And so she endured, standing between silence and sound, carrying what could not carry itself. The bell waited, and so did she. Spring arrived without ceremony. The snow retreated into the shadows of stone walls, and water ran again in the narrow channels cut by monks long dead. The earth softened. Seeds split open in darkness. Life, indifferent and persistent, resumed its work. Elswith felt no renewal. Her strength waned in ways that could not be measured by hunger or illness. It was as if each night beneath the bell required a small surrender, of warmth, of certainty, of breath held too long. She moved more slowly now, and her hands ached even when idle. When she washed at the basin, her reflection startled her. Her face seemed older, not lined, but thinned, as though something essential had been gently removed. Yet she did not stop speaking her sister's name. She spoke it while walking the path to the fields. She spoke it when the river broke free of ice. She spoke it to no one in particular, letting the syllables fall where they might. Memory, she discovered, was an act of resistance. To remember was to insist that a life had shape and weight, even after breath had ended. The valley listened, not openly, not easily, but slowly. Others began to add their own names to the air. Parents lost to famine, children claimed by fever, lovers buried before vows could be spoken. These names were spoken softly, often with eyes lowered, as if apology were required for their survival. The monastery grew uneasy. Brother Aldrich summoned the other monks to council. Their voices carried through stone corridors, low and controlled, like water under ice. The bell, for the first time in years, did not ring that night. The silence was so complete it woke Elswith from sleep with a start. She lay still, listening to the absence. Without the bell, the night felt larger, less defined. She realized how much of her life had been measured by that sound, how it had shaped her fear, her purpose, her devotion. Now, in its quiet, something else stirred. Grief, uncontained. She wept then, silently, her face turned toward the wall. Grief, she understood, was not only for the dead. It was for the living parts of oneself that were given away without return. The following evening, the monks came. They did not carry torches or weapons, only words. They stood at the threshold of her home, their shadows long in the fading light. Aldrich spoke for them. "You have altered the order," he said. "The dead are being drawn into the speech of the living. This is not your burden to bear." Elswith looked past him toward the hill. "They were never gone," she said, "only unheard." "Faith teaches us to let go," another monk said. "Faith also teaches us to witness," she replied. Aldrich's gaze softened, briefly. "There are limits," he said, "to compassion, to memory, even to love." Elswith thought of the voice in the tower, thinning, forgetting itself. She thought of the narrowing place. "Then perhaps those limits are made by the living," she said, "because we fear what it costs to cross them." They left her with no decree, no punishment. Authority, she had learned, often withdrew before what it could not resolve. That night, the bell rang again, but differently. The sound was unsteady, as if struck from within. Elswith climbed with difficulty, her breath ragged. Inside the tower, the bell swayed gently, though the rope remained untouched. The air vibrated, alive with a tension she could not name. The voice spoke once more, faint but clear. "You are carrying too much," it said. Elswith closed her eyes. "I chose this." "Yes," the voice replied, "and choice has a weight." There was no accusation in the words, only acknowledgement. She realized then that freedom was not the absence of chains, but the knowledge of which ones were worth bearing. "I am almost gone," the voice said. But I am not afraid now. Elswith felt something loosen in her chest. Tears came, warm and unrestrained. Then stay, she whispered, though she knew the futility of it. I cannot, the voice answered. But neither can you follow. The bell rang once more, deep and final. Dust fell from the beams. The sound seemed to sink into the stone itself, as if the tower were swallowing it whole. When the silence came, it did not lift. Elswith stood beneath the bell until dawn, her legs numb, her hands empty. She felt no presence now, only the echo of what had been. Yet within that emptiness was a strange peace. The voice had not vanished into nothing. It had passed through her, altered, carried onward. She descended the tower as the first light touched the valley. The air smelled of wet earth and new leaves. Life continued as it always had. Time, she knew now, does not heal, transforms. And what we carry through it shapes both the living and the dead. Elswith walked home alone, bearing what remained. Not a voice, but a truth. That remembrance is not a prison, but a bridge. And bridges, though they wear away, are built to be crossed. After the bell fell silent, the nights did not return to what they had been before. Silence, once noticed, has texture, presses against the ears. It acquires weight. In the valley, people lay awake longer, listening to what no longer called them. Some felt relief. Others felt a loss they could not name without shame. Elswith felt both. She no longer rose at the 9th hour. Her body, long disciplined by summons, woke instead in confusion, reaching for a purpose that was no longer there. The path to the tower grew over with new grass. Dew settled untouched. The stones remembered her feet longer than she did. Without the bell, time resumed its ordinary cruelty. Days passed. Seasons tilted forward. Elswith aged in small, unremarkable ways. An ache in the shoulder, a stiffness in the fingers at dawn. Nothing miraculous marked her survival. Those who had watched her for years now allowed themselves to look away. Whatever she had been, she was becoming again only a woman. Yet something in her had been irrevocably altered. She continued to speak the names of the dead, but more quietly now. Not as invocation, not as defiance, as practice, like prayer stripped of expectation. She spoke them while kneading bread, while mending torn cloth, while standing by the river where the water carried everything onward without pause. Memory no longer burned. It warmed. Brother Aldrich came to see her one last time, late in the summer. His step was unsteady. His voice, when he spoke, had lost some of its edge. The bell will not ring again, he said. I know, Elswith replied. He hesitated. Do you regret it? She thought of the tower's darkness, of the voice thinning into absence, of the long years given to listening. Regret, she realized, was too small a word. No, she said, but I am tired. Aldrich nodded. So are we all, he said. Then, after a pause, you taught us something dangerous. Elswith smiled faintly. Truth often is. He left her with a blessing this time, spoken not in Latin, but in the common tongue. Felt heavier for that. As autumn came, Elswith walked less. She sat more often by the hearth, listening to the wind press against the walls. Smoke stung her eyes. The house smelled of old wood and dried apples. Sometimes, in the half-light, she thought she heard a voice, but it was only memory rearranging itself, testing its own shape. She did not fear death anymore. Death, she had learned, was not the great thief. Forgetting was. And forgetting was not inevitable. It was a choice made slowly out of weariness or fear. To remember did not keep the dead alive, but it kept them from vanishing without witness. On one of the last warm evenings of the year, Elswith climbed the hill again. The tower stood unchanged, patient as stone can be. She placed her hand against its wall. It was cool, rough, real. No sound came from within. The bell hung still, a relic of weight and metal, no longer a mouth. She did not wait. Instead, she spoke, quietly, steadily, telling the night of a girl who had lived, who had laughed poorly hidden, who had died too young, and who had waited in darkness until love found a way to reach her. The words did not echo. They were absorbed like water into earth. That was enough. Elswith descended before full dark. Behind her, the tower remained, empty and complete. It would stand for centuries yet, historians might note, its bell silent, its purpose obscure. They would write of stone and dates and rules. They would not write of the woman who listened. But time does not erase everything. Some truths do not need record. They move quietly, carried by those willing to bear them, until they settle, gentle, bitter, and enduring, into what it means to be human. In the final years of Elswith's life, little distinguished one day from another. She rose with the light when she could, and when she could not, she waited without resentment. Her body obeyed more slowly now. Breath required attention. Steps were counted, not taken for granted. Yet there was no bitterness in this narrowing. Only recognition. Life, she understood, does not end all at once. It withdraws politely, as though not to disturb. The valley continued its rhythms without her at the center of them. Children grew and left. Fields were divided and rejoined. A new abbot came to the monastery, then another. The bell tower remained, its shadow lengthening and shortening with the seasons. Moss crept higher along its stones. Birds nested where once the air had trembled with sound. Sometimes travelers asked about it. Why did the bell not ring? Why was the tower kept, if it no longer served its purpose? The answers were vague. Old things often are. Someone might mention a woman who used to walk there at night. Someone else might say it was forbidden. Stories thinned as they passed from mouth to mouth, shedding detail, retaining only mood. Elswith did not mind. She had long since released the need to be understood. In winter, she stayed indoors, wrapped in wool that smelled faintly of smoke and age. The fire spoke softly to itself. Outside, the wind traced the same paths it always had, indifferent to memory. She spent hours in stillness, her thoughts unhurried, no longer pulled backward or forward with force. Time, at last, had loosened its grip. She thought often of faith, not as doctrine but as posture. Faith was the willingness to remain present when answers withdrew. It was not certainty. It was attention. In the tower, she had learned to listen. In the silence that followed, she had learned something harder, to let go without erasing. On her final night, the air was unusually clear. The moon hung low, pale and steady. Frost traced the edges of the window. Elswith lay awake, her hands folded loosely over her chest. Her breath came shallow, but without struggle. The house held its familiar smells: wood, ash, dried herbs. Nothing had changed. Everything had. She did not hear the bell, but she felt, with a gentleness that surprised her, a presence. Not a voice, not a call, but the absence of weight, as if something she had carried for a long time had finally been set down. She smiled, barely. Death, when it came, was quiet. No sound marked it, no sign. It passed as a shadow passes across stone, altering nothing it touches, yet leaving it changed. When morning came, the light fell across her face and found it still. Those who discovered her later said she looked rested, as though released from a long vigil. They buried her near the edge of the hill, where the tower's shadow reached in late afternoon. No marker named her deeds, only her name, carved simply, and the years of her life, unremarkable to the eye. The monks spoke prayers. The valley stood. Then time moved on as it always does. And yet, on certain nights, when the air is very still, those who walk near the tower claim they feel something pause within them. Not fear, not sound. A moment of attention, unbidden, as though the world itself were remembering how to listen. History will not record this. It will speak of structures and orders, of faith maintained and anomalies resolved. It will say the bell fell silent and never rang again. It will not say that a woman once stood between the living and the dead and refused to let either be diminished. But that is the nature of endurance. What truly lasts does not announce itself. It settles quietly into the human way of seeing, into how we speak the names of those who are gone, into how we accept the cost of loving across time, into how we learn that freedom is not escape from mortality, but the courage to meet it without turning away. The bell is silent, yet something still listens, and that, perhaps, is enough.
Like and subscribe to this channel for more interesting stories.